Eli Varn stood at the far end of Corridor Delta 9, his gaze drifting over the dull metallic walls of Orbital Platform Theta-12, the only place he had called home these past 8 years. Maintenance shifts had grown longer, and the station's thrumming system seemed ever more restless. Strange vibrations, cryptic clangs, and random flickers of overhead lighting kept him busy at all hours. He had grown accustomed to the station's many quirks, but lately, an unmistakable suspicion whispered that something beyond typical technical malfunctions stirred behind the hull plates. Ever since Eli's parents had passed, leaving him a modest inheritance, he had traveled from star system to star system, seeking a place that felt like home. Each stop along the trade routes felt emptier than the last, until by chance he landed a position here on Theta-12, an aging orbital facility that performed refuel duties, cargo transfers, and contract research. The pay was steady enough, though the living conditions were drab and utilitarian, except for the occasional docking freighter carrying an influx of new cargo. The station never seemed to change. He paused outside the maintenance locker. Inside awaited the tools he needed to mend a hairline crack in some water piping, which had begun leaking into the staff barracks. The overhead lights buzzed softly. When he pressed his hand to the control panel, the door hissed open, revealing coils of cable, tubes of sealant, and a battered old toolbox. He grabbed what he needed, closed the door, and headed toward his dormitory quarters, where rumor had it the leak's source was lurking behind the shared walls. He was halfway there when a repeating notion floated in the back of his mind, that persistent, eerie growling that had woken him in the middle of the night. He had heard it first a week ago, coming from somewhere near his sleeping chamber. It sounded faint at first, resonating softly as though from a distant corridor. Over the last 2 nights, however, it had grown louder and more distinct, something between a rumble and a hushed roar. He tried telling himself it was merely the air filtration system misfiring, or perhaps the station's ancient duct fans. Yet even his best attempts at self-persuasion fell short. There was something alive making that sound. Reaching his quarters, he entered a short code into the keypad. The door slid aside, revealing his modest room, a single cot against the wall, a metal desk with an outdated terminal, and an adjoining closet that occasionally rattled. This was where the noise had been loudest. Eli stepped in, letting the door close behind him with a gentle hiss. He set his tools on the narrow desk and turned toward the small closet, which stood flush against the wall. The overhead lights flickered again. Then came the growl, low, resonant, and undeniably close by. He took a cautious step forward. "Hello," he said, feeling faintly ridiculous talking to a closet. Another growl answered. Startled, his pulse quickened. He grabbed a wrench from the top of his desk just in case and gently slid the closet door aside. Inside, he saw what looked like coiled blankets, crumpled laundry, and the usual clutter, but deeper in the recess, beyond the faint illumination, something shifted. 2 golden eyes blinked at him through the dark, the pupils vertical and faintly luminous. Eli froze. Half expecting to be devoured, he held his breath. He heard the same soft rumble, but it was neither an outright threat nor a direct snarl. Instead, it was uncertain, an almost plaintive sound. Slowly, a silhouette emerged into the feeble light. Eli's gaze traveled upward and upward. Whatever it was, it looked tall, imposing, perhaps close to 10 feet if it were fully upright. A pair of horns curled from its head, and thick, fur-like hair covered broad shoulders. The creature's arms, partially hidden by the closet's gloom, ended in clawed hands. And yet, he did not see a drooling beast. Rather, he glimpsed intelligence, and more surprisingly, fear in those eyes. He took an involuntary step back, his heart hammering in his chest. But the creature did not leap at him. Instead, it shrank further into the closet, a low whimper humming in its throat. Then, it reached out one cautious, trembling claw toward him. His instincts screamed for him to run, to call station security. But he hesitated. This being, whatever it was, seemed frightened, not hostile. If it was some experiment escaped from one of the labs, he realized with sudden certainty that revealing its presence might condemn it to immediate captivity or worse. The station's security teams were not known for their compassion, and the labs rumored on the far side of Theta-12 specialized in questionable genetic manipulations. Eli felt a pang of empathy. He carefully raised both hands, open palms showing he meant no harm, the wrench forgotten at his side. He inched closer and, in the dim recess of that tiny closet, met the stranger's gaze. For the shape of her torso, suggested a female figure. Eyes were luminous and filled with an odd mix of desperation and relief. Her horns nearly scraped the ceiling. She wore something that looked like torn, makeshift clothing, no more than a few strips of cloth strapped across her chest, leaving much of her thick fur and muscular arms exposed. She had faint markings across her shoulders and forearms, the color reminiscent of silver stripes, though her face had an elongated muzzle, reminiscent of a predatory creature. Her expression carried an unmistakable vulnerability. "Can you understand me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head, softly grunted, and curled her clawed fingers as though grasping for words. Then a small, wavering voice, "Help. Zhara." Eli startled. The single word, or perhaps name Zhara, emerged in a guttural accent, but was undeniably speech. She could talk. His mind raced as he tried to recall if the labs had been rumored to create anthropomorphic hybrids. He had heard mention of Project Synthesis, but such details were always shrouded in secrecy. Drawing a tentative breath, he nodded slowly. "Zhara," he repeated, trying to convey gentleness. "I'm Eli Varn," she snorted softly, letting the last echoes of her fearful growl dissipate. Then, as though exhausted by the introduction, she sank further back. The cramped closet barely fit her enormous frame. He could see that she was trembling, perhaps from cold or hunger or both. Eli's mind whirled. The wise, safe move would be to call station security. Yet every instinct in him balked at that course, for he saw in her eyes a pleading that could only belong to one desperate for compassion. A decision formed reckless, but, in his heart, the only moral choice. He would hide her, at least for the moment, until he could figure out what was going on. Perhaps it was a foolish plan, but the path of turning her in felt even more cruel. "All right," he said quietly. "Stay here, stay quiet, and I'll help. Don't come out until I say so." She nodded with surprising comprehension, her luminous eyes tracking him as he pulled a small blanket from his cot and tucked it gently around her broad shoulders. Then, after making sure she had some measure of comfort, he slid the closet door nearly closed, leaving only a crack so she could breathe fresh air. Standing back, he felt his adrenaline surging. He had just discovered a massive, horned alien Beastwoman in his closet, and somehow, instead of an immediate meltdown, he had promised her protection. The ramifications would surely be massive, but in that moment, he pushed the panic aside and decided he would see this through. Something told him Zhara was in dire need of a friend. News traveled slowly across Theta-12, mainly because the station housed only a few dozen permanent staff members, supplemented by transient researchers and cargo crews. Still, Eli knew that the disappearance of an experimental subject, if Zhara was indeed from the labs, would not go unnoticed for long. Hoping to glean information, he decided to do his job as usual, hoping to overhear any gossip or security alerts that might betray how close the net was closing. That afternoon, after ensuring Zhara was still hidden, he made a show of returning to the corridor for the pipe repair. The leak had worsened, dripping a steady trickle onto the floor. As he worked, he overheard two technicians discussing rumors of a containment breach on the research decks. They murmured in hushed voices about a missing proto-hybrid that might have overpowered a guard. No official bulletins had been circulated yet. Perhaps the labs aimed to keep it secret for as long as possible. But it was only a matter of time before a station-wide alert was issued. Finishing his repair, he made his way to a communal lounge area, a drab metal chamber with battered seating. A handful of off-duty staff lounged there, sipping reconstituted coffee. Eli tuned out the droning hum of the ventilation system and listened instead for any mention of the labs. One older staffer, a shuttle docking controller, mentioned seeing an unusual commotion near the freight lifts. Another person recalled a rumor of increased security presence near the labs, sensing the atmosphere of quiet tension. Eli felt certain the station's command team was about to clamp down. When he returned to his room, he tapped the door panel quickly, then slipped inside. Zhara was exactly as he had left her, coiled awkwardly in the closet's cramped space. Though she had ventured to nibble on a protein bar from his emergency ration pack, she glanced up quickly, then turned her gaze downward, as though ashamed to be rummaging in his meager supplies. Eli gave her a gentle nod. "It's okay. I brought more." He placed a small box of rations inside the closet, along with a canteen of water. She reached out, nose twitching as she sniffed the offerings, then carefully took a packet to sample. A small, grateful rumble resonated in her throat. He sank onto his cot, running a hand through his short, cropped hair, heavy with worry. "They're going to search," he muttered. "You won't be safe here for long. I might try to get you off the station." The notion sounded ludicrous. He was just a lowly maintenance worker. Smuggling out a large horned hybrid was surely impossible. But the alternative was too grim to consider. Zhara's gaze flicked up, her golden eyes reflecting the overhead light. "Leave," she said, the single word laden with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Her voice rumbled in her broad chest, a sound that resonated in the small cabin. "Eventually, yes," he sighed. "But how? The station is locked down. Without the proper identification, we won't get past security checks or mandatory scans." He frowned. "We might need to be clever. Could you hide in some cargo container? Maybe if a friend with a small ship could smuggle you out." But the reality loomed daunting. He had no close friends among the station's shady freelancers, only superficial acquaintances. After all, Eli kept to himself, living a quiet existence free of complicated entanglements until now. He looked over at Zhara and felt a surge of empathy. Her massive form did not belong in a cramped closet. She was far too large and proud for these claustrophobic confines, and he suspected she was far more than just a lab experiment. Something about her manner spoke of intelligence, not just cunning. That single word "help" had been articulated with more than just desperation. There was a resolute spark in her eyes, one that hinted at a person behind the unusual form. Zhara, sensing his study of her, curled her tail around her legs. The tail itself was thickly furred, with a tuft at the end. She let out a faint whimper that quickly transformed into a kind of uneasy purr. The more he studied her, the more she seemed a fusion of large feline and robust humanoid. Her horns evoked some manner of mythical beast, though her soft, furred face held a regal countenance. In the stillness, he wondered how she had communicated well enough to pick up scraps of the human tongue. "Learn," she said haltingly, surprising him with her attempt to speak. "The men, in the white, they talked. I listen. They teach me words, not kind. I escape." Her voice trembled at the memory. Eli felt a chill. "Men in white, lab technicians." She nodded, blinking rapidly. "Pain, many tests." He exhaled, anger surging. "I'm sorry that happened. You shouldn't have been treated like that." She gave a slight bow of her head, then murmured softly, "Thank you." Her understanding of the language, though incomplete, was evidently growing. Or perhaps fear had sharpened her ability to learn quickly. In any case, it deepened Eli's resolve to help. Time pressed upon him. He knew that soon, station officers would begin conducting sweeps, searching for anomalies. Hiding Zhara inside a closet was unsustainable, especially given her size. So, pulling the battered terminal from his desk, he began searching the station's cargo manifests, trying to identify any inbound or outbound shipments that might offer an escape route. He typed furiously, scanning for small private vessels that might slip away from the station without intense scrutiny. Zhara watched him in silence, occasionally shifting to relieve the cramped ache in her limbs. Eli occasionally paused to toss her bits of dried fruit or a few sips of water. She made small humming noises that sounded like thanks. He answered with quiet nods, feeling an odd camaraderie blossoming between them. This was no mere beast, but a being with a soul as worthy of respect as any humans. Hours ticked by as he pored over schedules and flight logs. Then, at last, he found a faint glimmer of opportunity. An old colleague from his earliest days on the station, a pilot named Jask Tarn, was rumored to be arriving in 2 days. Jask specialized in clandestine cargo runs, often operating at the edges of legal enterprise. If there was anyone who might be persuaded, perhaps, with a few credits or a heartfelt plea to ferry them off station, it was Jask. Eli closed the terminal and rubbed the tension from his eyes. In 2 days, if we can hold out that long, we might have a shot, he said quietly, glancing at Zhara. She perked up slightly at the mention of this possibility, though the gravity of the plan was clearly lost on her. The station search would likely begin even sooner, which meant they would need to move carefully. He prayed that no one had traced the escaping experiment's tracks to his door. Leaving her for a moment, he exited the room and walked down the corridor to scrounge up more rations, claiming it for his own extended shift. The station's meager staff kitchen offered little beyond packaged nutrient bars, dried fruits, and heavily preserved vegetables. He grabbed enough to fill a small satchel, ignoring the curious looks of a few coworkers who passed by. Let them assume he was hoarding. He had bigger concerns than station gossip. At the threshold of his quarters, he felt the cold trickle of dread. If security had decided to do a random check in the few minutes he was gone, they might have discovered Zhara. Hand trembling, he keyed in the door code. It slid open to reveal his room, as he'd left it quiet and still. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Zhara blinked at him from the closet's shadows, her massive body folded uncomfortably. He offered her the bag of supplies. She took it gently, the sharp tips of her claws careful not to tear through the thin material. "Thank you," she said, more confidently now. "You can say that pretty well," he remarked with a soft chuckle. Then, sobering, he whispered, "We'll get you out of here, I promise. Just hold tight." She nodded, a glimmer of gratitude lighting her golden eyes. With that, he began drawing up mental plans for how to slip her past the prying sensors and inquisitive security teams. He prayed that he could make good on his promise, that they might both live long enough to see that day. Though his mind was clouded with doubt, one truth stood out clearly. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The next morning, Theta-12 awoke to muted alarms and curt announcements. In the corridor outside Eli's cabin, red emergency lights flickered intermittently, accompanied by a terse message over the station's speakers. "Attention all personnel, due to an ongoing investigation. All staff must submit to random corridor checks. Please have identification ready. Non-compliance will result in immediate detention." Eli felt a chill as he listened. The labs had evidently concluded their missing experiment was on the loose, and Station Command was done keeping it under wraps. He suspected the security squads, affectionately nicknamed the Wranglers by staff, were already gearing up to search every nook and cranny on the station. He turned to the closet and found Zhara peeking out, her expression anxious. "Zhara, they're going to search." She nodded, evidently catching his meaning. "We can't just keep you in there. If they do a sweep of every room, they'll find you." She let out a distressed whine, then pressed her large hand to the doorframe. "IHIDE, not here," he said. "We need somewhere safer." Casting about, he recalled the rarely used maintenance corridors that ran behind the main compartments, a labyrinth of crawl spaces and old ventilation shafts. If he could guide her into that warren of seldom patrolled areas, they might hold out until Jask arrived, but it would require cunning and a bit of luck. They had little time. Drawing on his knowledge of the station's blueprint, he quickly pulled up an old schematic on his terminal. He traced a path from his quarters to a bulkhead entrance that led into the maintenance shafts. If they could slip away undetected, Zhara could hide there, at least for a short while. "Follow me," he said, pressing his ear to the door. Hearing no footsteps, he signaled her to move. She rose carefully, stooping to avoid the low ceiling, her horns nearly grazing the overhead lighting fixture. Her footsteps, while heavy, were surprisingly quiet given her size. Eli led her into the corridor. They moved briskly, passing closed doors and silent thresholds. The usual bustle of staff had been subdued by the sudden security crackdown. Soon, they neared a corridor intersection, where a bored security guard with a sidearm and an electronic scanner stood, checking the IDs of passers-by. Eli motioned Zhara to stay behind him, pressing her enormous body against the wall. Then, with as much nonchalance as possible, he walked toward the guard. ID. The guard barked, scarcely bothering to look up. Eli handed over his station card. The guard held the scanner over it, waiting until it beeped green. The guard then flicked his gaze up, suspiciously scanning the corridor beyond. "You alone?" "Yeah, just me," Eli answered quickly, hoping his face did not betray his pounding heart. "Move along." The guard handed back the ID, turning his attention to the next staffer who approached from the other side. Eli exhaled as quietly as he could, then turned the corner, trusting Zhara to follow silently at a few steps' distance. Once they were out of sight of the guard, Zhara emerged, her steps careful. They hurried down the corridor to an old, disused hatch labeled Maintenance Shaft 4A. Eli keyed in a short code on the control panel. The heavy metal door groaned before sliding open partway. Stuck from lack of use, he grunted, pushing it manually the rest of the way. Inside lay a dimly lit shaft, lined with tangled wiring, pipes, and duct conduits. The air felt stale, tinged with the acrid scent of lubricants. Zhara ducked inside, her tall form barely fitting. She shot Eli a tense glance, as though awaiting further instructions. "We'll move deeper in. There should be a small service alcove with enough space for you to rest," he whispered. Rummaging through a utility cabinet just inside, he found a portable lamp, flicked it on, and held it aloft to illuminate the gloom. The space was narrow, but at least it was hidden from casual patrols. They navigated the winding corridors of cables and pipes until they reached a small junction that opened into a wider area, likely once used to store maintenance bots. Dust coated the surfaces, and a few stacked crates remained. Zhara tested the air with her nose, then carefully stepped inside, turning around to examine the place. She let out a small, relieved murmur, despite the gloom. This space was far larger than a cramped closet. She could at least stand up here, albeit hunched. Eli set down the lamp, rummaging through his satchel for a ration bar, some dried fruit, and a flask of water. "Here," he said. "We'll have to ration carefully. I'll bring more supplies when I can." She nodded, accepting the provisions with humble gratitude. "Now, we just need to lay low," he continued in a hushed voice. "In a day or so, a pilot I know might arrive. Hopefully, we can slip you onto his ship." She tried to speak, forming the words slowly. "You, help. You, no. Anger, fear." He hesitated, gathering his thoughts. "I was afraid at first. You are, well, quite big." A faint smile tugged at his lips despite the tension. "But when I saw your eyes, how scared you were, I couldn't let them take you back. Whatever they did to you, it wasn't right." Zhara inclined her head, the gesture oddly regal. Grateful." They settled into uneasy silence. Eli's mind swam with thoughts of the risks he was taking. A single slip could see them both locked away, yet he felt no regrets about shielding her. Something about her presence awakened his sense of justice, roused him from the complacency he had felt living on this station for years. At length, the overhead station klaxon rang out again, echoing through the corridors. "Attention! All staff must comply with security sweeps. Any suspicious behavior should be reported. Repeat, all staff must comply." He shut his eyes, leaning against a crate. The walls were closing in. If the labs got even a whiff of Zhara's location, they would descend on this place in a flash. Tranquilizer rifles at the ready. He glanced at her, even crouched. She radiated a quiet dignity. She deserved better than to live the rest of her life as a caged specimen. "Rising," he said, I have to go. Security might get suspicious if I'm gone too long. I'll come back tonight with more supplies. Don't wander out, no matter what you hear. Understood. She nodded, eyes solemn. I stay. He gave a final nod, then slipped out of the alcove, carefully relatching the hatch behind him to keep it unobtrusive. Once in the corridor, he blended with the other staff hurrying between shift duties, letting the daily routines conceal him. All the while, a knot of worry weighed in his stomach. Over the next 24 hours, the station's tension mounted. Security patrolled every corridor, scanning IDs and rummaging through storage rooms. A rumor spread that the lab's lead scientist, Dr. Salwin, had demanded the direct involvement of Station Command to find Specimen Z. The hush that fell across the staff lounge whenever someone mentioned the labs spoke volumes about their dread. People had long whispered that Dr. Salwin's research pushed ethical boundaries. Now, with an escaped subject, the rumor mill spun even wilder tales. Eli, for his part, kept his head down, fulfilling his maintenance duties while listening for any mention of odd sightings. Late in the evening, under cover of the station's dim night cycle lighting, he made his way back to the hidden alcove. He carried additional supplies, more ration packs, a thermal blanket, and a canister of water. Slipping through the maintenance hatch, he followed the lamplight's glow and found Zhara curled in a corner, dozing lightly. Her ears flicked up as soon as he arrived, and she gave a low purr of welcome. He set the supplies down, offering a cautious smile. "How are you holding up?" She rose, stretching her towering frame. "Dark," she rumbled, motioning around her. "No, outside, but safer." "Yes, it's safer here," he agreed. He held out a ration bar, which she accepted gratefully. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he gently draped the thermal blanket over her broad shoulders. The station's climate controls were known to fluctuate in these out-of-the-way shafts, leaving them colder than living quarters. She pulled the blanket around her fur, looking oddly touched by his gesture. He settled onto a crate opposite her. "So, if you don't mind me asking, do you remember where you're from? Before the labs, I mean." She shook her head, horns swaying. "Memory, fuzzy. Many tests. IFEEEL, born in a place of trees, water, big sky. But maybe dream." Her words faltered, as though the strain of forming them in English taxed her. "I remember harsh lights, men in white, needles, tubes, pain." Eli's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he repeated, wishing he could erase those memories for her. A pang of anger at the lab's cruelty pierced him. He vowed that if they got out of this, he would do all in his power to help her find a home, perhaps that mythical place of forests and wide-open skies. As they shared a hushed moment, a soft beep from his wrist communicator drew his attention. It was a coded message from Jask Tarn, arriving tomorrow. "Need a favor, old buddy. Meet me at Docking Bay B7. Eli felt a jolt of hope. Jask was coming sooner than expected. A glimmer of a plan took shape, though it was riddled with uncertainties. He met Zhara's gaze. "Tomorrow, if fortune smiles, we'll leave this station. You'll never have to see those labs again." She cocked her head, eyes searching. "We'll need to get you on board a small cargo vessel. My friend might be able to help, though he'll likely demand some credits. We'll figure it out." She reached out and placed one large, clawed hand over his smaller one, an unspoken gesture of gratitude. Eli felt a warmth in his chest. For a moment, the station's oppressive gloom and the swirling dangers outside seemed distant. Later, after discussing the plan in hushed tones, he bid her rest, promising to return in the morning. On unsteady legs, he made his way back into the main corridors, heart pounding with anticipation. If they could just slip past the security checks, if Jask could be convinced, if everything lined up, they might succeed. But if not, the labs would tear Zhara from him and bury her in some underground testing chamber forever. That possibility haunted his thoughts as he returned to his quarters. Morning broke with stark, artificial lights flicking on throughout the station. Jarring everyone awake, Eli rose, trying to steady his nerves for the day's challenge. He had arranged a pretense to handle a technical glitch in docking bay B7, giving him a legitimate reason to be there when Jask's vessel arrived. The rest would hinge on improvisation. He sneaked back to the maintenance shaft first, finding Zhara awake and pacing in the cramped space, her tail lashed with nervous tension. "Time?" she asked simply. He nodded. "Yes, we'll head down to B7, he paused, glancing at the cramped corridor. "But getting you there unseen is another story. We'll have to time it carefully. Avoid patrols. Once we get close, maybe we can stow you in a cargo container. A big one. Then we bring you aboard." Zhara gave a soft grunt of understanding, though her eyes shone with fear at the thought of discovery. Eli tried to reassure her with a gentle hand on her arm, although he could barely wrap his fingers around her thick bicep. "We can do this," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. Cautiously, they entered the station's regular corridors. Even early in the day, security squads were out in force, scanning IDs and checking random compartments. Eli led Zhara through back hallways, pausing behind corners whenever footsteps approached. Twice, they narrowly avoided detection, once ducking behind a supply crate, another time slipping into a side corridor until the guards passed. Eli's heart hammered with every close call. Eventually, they reached the docking bay's service entrance. B7 was a minor slip, typically used by smaller freight vessels or personal craft. Through a side window, Eli spotted Jask's ship, the Shapeshifter, a squat, rust-patched vessel that looked unimpressive but boasted hidden compartments perfect for discreet cargo runs. He breathed a sigh of relief. "Stay here," he whispered to Zhara, pointing to a dark alcove behind a set of crates. "I'll talk to Jask first." She hunkered down, pulling the blanket tight around her. Eli strode into the docking bay, adopting his best nothing-to-see-here attitude. He found Jask near the ramp of the Shapeshifter, arguing with a station customs officer about manifests. The pilot was a wiry, middle-aged man with a perpetually untrustworthy grin. Spotting Eli, Jask offered a casual wave. "Well, if it isn't my favorite maintenance wizard," he called. "You fix that glitch for me, pal." Eli forced a smile and shook Jask's hand. "Good to see you. Let me handle this," he said to the officer, weaving a plausible explanation about a minor malfunction in the bay's scanning system. In short order, the officer grudgingly concluded Jask's cargo was legitimate enough and moved off to harass someone else. With a low chuckle, Jask turned to Eli. "I heard about the station clampdown. Something about a missing lab monster." He leaned in, a sly glint in his eyes. "Any truth to that? Place feels tense as a coiled spring." Eli swallowed. "You might say that. Listen, Jask, I need a favor." He glanced around to ensure no eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. "I have to get an unregistered passenger off the station. It's huge, complicated. And if we get caught, it'll land us both in serious trouble." Jask arched an eyebrow. "Interesting." He rubbed his chin, then gave a casual shrug. "All right. You know me. I don't mind bending a few rules. But I expect a fair cut. My fuel's not free, and I'm risking my neck if it's that big of a deal." Eli nodded, already anticipating the cost. "I figured, I can give you whatever I've saved, 2,000 credits." It was almost everything he had, but he didn't see another path. "Once we're clear, maybe I can pay more if you'll help us find a safer harbor somewhere. But for now, 2,000 is what I've got." Jask considered, scratching the stubble on his cheek. "Okay, that's workable. Let's not do it under the nose of the entire station security detail, though. We'll need a distraction, or at least a quiet window. I'll load up cargo soon. If your passenger can fit in a cargo pod, I can stow it in the hold and slip away before the next scanning cycle. The Shapeshifter has a few stealth features that might help mask a life sign, if it's not too large." Eli cleared his throat. "She's, about 10 feet tall, horned, but we can try to maneuver her into a big crate." Jask's eyes widened. 10 holy stars. You're not joking," he cursed under his breath. This is insane. But all right, we'll try. I'll prep my cargo. We have to do it fast. The next security cycle runs in about an hour. If we miss that window, they'll run a full sweep of any newly arrived vessels, including mine. Eli's heart drummed. Understood. I'll bring her in. Be ready. They parted with a quick handshake. Eli returned to the alcove, heart pounding with urgency. Zhara peered at him with a mixture of anxiety and hope. We have an hour, he said. Come on. Steering her carefully around cargo machinery. He guided her to a large cylindrical crate. Its lid swung open. Inside, it appeared to be filled with netting and packaging for shipments. Zhara swallowed hard, mustering her courage, then hoisted herself into the crate, curled up. She barely fit. Her horns and tail pressed awkwardly against the metal walls. Eli piled extra netting around her, ensuring the top would close. Before sealing it, he locked eyes with her. I'll be right here, he promised softly. Though the plan was to stay outside. We'll be on Jask's ship soon, and then we'll get out of here, she nodded, trying to quell her trembling. He closed the lid. Guiding a hover lifter, he carefully moved the crate onto Jask's loading ramp. Inside the dim cargo hold, Jask gave him a silent nod and pointed to a corner beneath some innocuous shipments. They slid the crate there. Eli secured it, then stepped back, exhaling in relief that no alarms had sounded so far. This was the most dangerous moment. If security showed up now to inspect the cargo, all would be lost. Let me finalize the flight logs, Jask whispered. Then we'll power up. You might want to strap in this tub rattles, like a can of nails, when we hit sublight burn. Eli gave a tight nod, sparing one last glance at the sealed crate. Then, Jask ascended to the cockpit. The cargo hold's overhead lights dimmed, replaced by a faint orange glow. Eli found a corner seat among the cargo straps, forcing himself to remain calm. Seconds ticked by like hours. Suddenly, the ship's comm system crackled. A voice from Station Command demanded, "Shapeshifter, hold position. We have a security override. Prepare for cargo inspection." Eli's stomach turned to ice. Jask's voice replied coolly, "Copy that. Station Control. Opening hatch for scan." Then the pilot muted the mic and hissed down the hold. "They're doing a last-minute look. Keep quiet." In the hush, Eli listened, heart pounding. As the cargo hatch slid open, a pair of security officers, scanning devices in hand, stepped inside. He crouched behind a crate, praying they wouldn't open the container with Zhara. The first guard's device beeped softly, checking for contraband or unregistered life forms. Eli held his breath. Just then, a shriek of alarms echoed from somewhere else in the docking bay. Startled, the guard snapped around, the second guard shouting into a comm, "What's going on?" The pilot winked in Eli's direction. Jask must have triggered some remote sabotage or distraction. The security officers rushed out, evidently drawn to the sudden chaos. Eli let out a breath of relief. "Cargo check incomplete," grumbled one of the officers over the comm. "We'll be back after investigating the alarm." Jask seized the opening. He quickly sealed the cargo ramp, fired the engines, and secured departure clearance with a hasty data handshake. The shapeshifter lifted off from the docking clamps, pivoting out into space before Station Command could re-establish the lockdown. Eli felt the ship's thrusters rumble beneath him. Gravity shifted, pressing him into the deck as they accelerated away from Theta-12's metallic hull. He imagined the sensor alarms going wild behind them. But if Jask's stealth modifications held, they might outrun the station's limited pursuit craft. Adrenaline coursed through Eli. They had done it. They were off the station with Zhara in tow. Now they only had to vanish into the star lanes before the labs could track them. Eli closed his eyes, a flood of relief washing over him. Zhara was safe, for now. But the journey was only beginning. Where would they go next? And how would they stay ahead of the lab's far-reaching influence? For the moment, though, success tasted sweet, and the joy of escaping that sterile station, with its looming threats and secret experiments, was a victory to savor. Once they were a safe distance away, Jask engaged the autopilot and hopped down to the cargo hold with a grin. What a rush, eh? Now, about that 2,000 credits. Eli nodded, fumbling for his datapad. He transferred the promised sum, draining almost every last credit from his savings. Jask checked his account balance and gave a satisfied nod. Pleasure doing business. Now let's see what we're working with. He moved to the large crate. Eli and Jask pried it open carefully. Inside, blinking in the sudden light, was Zhara. She uncurled, stretching painfully as she emerged, her horns nearly scraping the hold's ceiling. Jask let out a low whistle at her towering presence. She flicked her ears, eyeing the pilot warily. Eli stepped forward, placing a calming hand on her arm. Zhara, this is Jask. He's the one who helped us leave the station. We can trust him, somewhat. Jask gave a mock frown. Hey, I'm as trustworthy as they come for the right price. Zhara stared at him for a moment, then gave a small, respectful bow of her head. Thank you, she managed, shaping the words with care. Jask shook his head in amazement. She really can talk. So it's true. One of those lab projects. I never thought I'd see one up close. He paused, scanning her features. Well, she's definitely bigger than I expected. Eli cleared his throat. Yeah, that's why we need to find somewhere safe. Far away from corporate labs or prying authorities. He gazed at Zhara, noticing how tense she looked in this new environment. Do you have any suggestions? Jask, some frontier system or neutral territory where we won't be hunted. The pilot leaned against a nearby crate, lips pursed in thought. There's an old jump gate near the terminus sector. Leads to a backwater system called Cirrus 9. Hardly anyone goes there since the mine dried up. Might be a good place to hide. I can take you that far, but that's where we part ways. I have business to conduct in more civilized sectors. Eli exchanged a glance with Zhara, who responded with a silent nod. They didn't have many options. Cirrus 9 might be their best bet. A deserted planet could offer them the freedom and anonymity they needed. Assuming they could survive the environment, then let's do it, Eli said, turning to Jask. Take us to Cirrus 9. We'll figure out the rest on our own. The pilot clapped him on the shoulder. That's settled. We have enough fuel for a direct route, but we'll have to watch for patrols or bounty hunters. The labs might put out a reward for the big girl here. A wave of worry flickered across Zhara's face at the mention of being hunted. Eli rubbed the back of his neck. We'll manage. Let's just get as far away as possible. Jask nodded, heading back to the cockpit. We'll set course. Meanwhile, feel free to make yourselves comfortable, but watch the delicate cargo up in the main hold. Big horns. No offense. He winked and disappeared through the hatch. Eli guided Zhara to a corner of the hold, where they could settle amidst a few crates. He rummaged through supplies, finding some extra blankets. We'll have to sleep here for a couple of nights, he said. It's not comfortable, but better than a lab cage. Zhara grunted softly in agreement. Then, her gaze drifted to one of the small porthole windows. Through it, the inky blackness of space, dotted with distant stars, stretched on infinitely. She stared transfixed. Beautiful, she whispered. Eli followed her gaze, feeling a pang of wonder himself. He had grown so used to space travel that he rarely paused to admire the stars. But seeing them anew through Zhara's eyes rekindled a sense of awe. Here was a being who had endured captivity, who might never have seen such a sight except through a sterile lab viewport. Now she was free, or at least freer than she had been. Yeah, he murmured. Space is beautiful, and scary too, but mostly beautiful. She turned from the view, meeting his eyes. You, free me, she said softly, her rough voice laced with gratitude. I not forget. He felt a flush of warmth, uncertain how to respond. IJUST did what was right, he managed. Anyone in my shoes would have done the same. Zhara looked away thoughtfully, as though unsure whether she believed his words. In truth, he doubted many of the station's staff would have taken such a reckless risk. The labs commanded fear, and Theta-12 was a place where questioning authority could lead to serious consequences. But for him, For reasons he could barely articulate, the choice had been clear. They passed the rest of the day in quiet conversation, though her limited vocabulary meant relying on gestures and context. With every passing hour, she improved, forging sentences that, while still rough, conveyed her thoughts more clearly. By the time the shapeshifter had traveled halfway to the jump gate, they could speak in halting but understandable English. At night, or the rough equivalent when Jask dimmed the cabin lights to simulate a sleep cycle, Eli found a corner to lie down. Zhara curled up nearby, massive arms folded under her head, tail wrapped across her side. He was surprised to realize that, despite her imposing figure, he felt utterly at ease in her presence now. She no longer seemed a terrifying beast, but rather a friend one he would gladly protect. In the lull before sleep took him, he listened to the gentle hum of the ship's engines and felt the subtle vibrations through the deck. A flicker of worry still gnawed at him, wondering what awaited them in the Cirrus 9 system. But at least they were together, forging a path away from the nightmares of Theta-12. For the first time in a long while, Eli dared to hope that life might hold some measure of happiness for both of them. Days later, the shapeshifter emerged from hyperspace near the ancient jump gate, a towering ring of battered metal drifting in orbit around a dead star. Jask skillfully maneuvered the ship through the ring's flickering energy field, activating a slipstream corridor that propelled them across the galaxy in moments. When they burst out the other side, they found themselves in the Cirrus 9 system. At first glance, it appeared quiet, no major shipping lanes, no bustling traffic beacons. The local sun glowed dim and orange, providing a meager halo of light to 3 orbiting worlds. One was a gas giant, swirling with storm bands. Another a rocky planet with searing deserts. And the third a partially green orb that showed evidence of vegetation. This was Cirrus 9 itself, once a mining colony, now mostly abandoned, according to Jask. Only a handful of settlers, hermits, or drifters might remain in the cockpit. Jask keyed the controls for descent, bringing them into the atmosphere of Cirrus 9. Turbulence rocked the ship slightly, but the pilot handled it with practiced ease. From the small window in the cargo hold, Eli and Zhara peered down at rolling plains dotted with clusters of trees. In the far distance rose jagged mountains, crowned with mist. Streams and rivers glinted faintly. It was a world of subdued beauty, reminiscent of a frontier waiting to be rediscovered. The shapeshifter settled down on a flat expanse of grassland near the outskirts of what once might have been a small settlement. Rusted metal debris and collapsed shelters indicated that whoever had lived here had departed long ago, leaving the place to be reclaimed by nature. Eli and Zhara stood by the ramp as it hissed open, letting in a gust of fresh, albeit slightly chilly, air. Zhara inhaled deeply, her eyes widening in wonder at the unfamiliar scents. She gripped the edge of the ramp, stepping forward onto solid ground for the first time since leaving the station. The wind ruffled her fur, making her horns gleam under the weak sunlight. Eli felt a surge of renewed determination. This was their chance to build a life free of corporate labs and constant fear. Of course, the planet might hold its own dangers, but at least they could face them on their own terms. Jask joined them, arms folded as he surveyed the landscape. Not exactly paradise, but you won't have station goons breathing down your neck out here. Keep your heads low, scavenge what you can from the old settlements, and you should survive well enough. There's game to hunt, or so I've heard. Zhara gazed at the distant green-brown expanse with unconcealed curiosity. Eli turned to the pilot. Thanks, Jask. You saved our lives. I wish we had more to give you. Jask shrugged. It's fine. I'll slip away now, before someone tries to track me. I only hope the labs don't figure out exactly where you went. He reached out and shook Eli's hand firmly. Good luck, buddy, and watch out for wildlife. With that, Jask retreated into his ship. The ramp sealed behind him. Engines rumbled to life, spitting dust and bits of grass into the air. The shapeshifter lifted off, climbed skyward, and vanished through the low cloud cover, leaving Eli and Zhara alone in the quiet of Cirrus 9. They stood side by side, letting the tranquility of the frontier wash over them. The wind's soft whistle, the distant rustling of some small creatures in the grass, and the gentle hush of a nearby stream replaced the mechanical hums they had known so long aboard the station. Zhara looked to Eli, a mixture of anticipation and trepidation shining in her golden eyes. "We stay," he nodded. "Yes, we stay. Let's see what we can find." Gathering their meager belongings, a few ration packs, a portable water purifier, and some basic tools, he led her toward the crumbling remains of the settlement. If they were lucky, they might salvage old equipment or shelter frames. Cirrus 99N's mild climate offered a chance to survive with minimal technology, at least for a while. As they walked, Zhara kept glancing around, tail swishing in excitement. At one point, she crouched to investigate a patch of wildflowers, her large claws incredibly gentle as she lifted a bloom toward her nose. She smiled, an expression that looked surprisingly soft on her furred face. Eli felt a wave of fondness for her sense of awe, a stark contrast to the sterile station corridors they had left behind. They reached the settlement's edge, stepping around rusted walls and collapsed roofs. A sign, half buried in dust, indicated this place was once called Fallow's Outpost. Weeds sprouted through cracked pavement, and the skeletons of vehicles rusted in overgrown parking lots. A few structures stood partially intact, though they leaned precariously. One in particular seemed stable enough to explore. Inside, they found battered furniture, long since stripped of anything valuable. Light filtered through holes in the roof. Debris lay scattered on the floor. Still, after a few minutes of careful searching, Eli found a functioning solar-powered lamp, its panel intact. Though dusty, he wiped it clean, grinning when it flickered weakly to life. "This might come in handy," he said, showing Zhara. She nodded, then tested a nearby table. Her claws easily raked away old splinters, but the main supports held. It might serve as a surface to prepare food or store gear. "We fix?" she asked, gesturing around the interior of the structure. "Yeah," Eli agreed. "It'll need a lot of work, but we can patch it up. It's not much, but it's a start. Let's see if we can find some metal sheeting to fix that roof. We can gather wood from the surrounding area too." Zhara cracked a small, toothy smile. "Yes, we make home." He felt his heart lighten at her words. Home. An odd word to apply to a half-collapsed shack on a forgotten planet. Yet somehow it felt true. Together, they began clearing debris. Zhara's immense strength proved invaluable. She could lift fallen beams with ease. Tossing them aside, Eli pried nails from boards, hammered out bent metal, and did his best to create a rough patch for the holes overhead. By the time dusk fell, they had made modest progress, enough to keep out the worst of the elements. They shared a meager meal of ration bars and found a corner to rest, huddled together for warmth. The building's damaged walls still let in drafts, sending chills through them. Yet neither complained. After all, they were free. No alarms, no prying eyes, no labs or watchful guards, just the silent stretch of a new world outside. As darkness enveloped them, Eli turned on the solar lamp, letting its gentle glow illuminate the interior. Zhara gazed at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light. "You tired?" she asked, carefully placing a large, furred hand on his shoulder. He felt the warmth through his shirt. "I'm okay," he replied, voice quiet. "Just a lot on my mind. We're safe here, but how long until the labs figure out where you went? Do we live off the land forever? Is there any chance you can find your kind, if they exist?" She frowned, searching for words. "I not know, my kind. Maybe not exist, but..." She paused, lifting her chin with a hint of resolve. "We survive together." Eli couldn't help smiling softly. "Yeah, we survive together." He settled down, leaning against the wall. Zhara curled up beside him, her presence comforting despite the chill in the air. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it brought dreams that were far gentler than those of the station's sterile corridors. He dreamed of wide skies, green hills, and the two of them exploring a world unbounded by fear. Days stretched into weeks on Cirrus 9. Each dawn found Eli and Zhara working tirelessly to transform the battered outpost into a livable shelter. She scavenged fallen trees and broken beams to reinforce walls, while he repaired old wiring, cobbling together a modest power source from salvaged panels and batteries. Although they had few supplies, resourcefulness became their watchword. They discovered that the local fauna included small, deer-like creatures with shimmering coats that blended into the tall grasses. Zhara, with her keen senses, identified potential prey. But after a few cautious hunts, she realized it was more challenging than she expected. The animals were swift, and the wide plains offered them ample room to flee. Still, they managed to catch enough to supplement their dwindling ration packs. The first time she succeeded in bringing down a deer-like creature, she insisted on using every part of it, from the meat for sustenance to the hide for making coverings. Eli was both impressed and a bit unsettled by her fierce skill, but necessity overruled squeamishness. Their bond deepened, nurtured by the shared effort of survival. Once, when a sudden storm pelted them with rain, Zhara laughed a deep, rumbling sound as she and Eli raced to cover the roof's weakest points with tarp. Water soaked them through, and the sky flashed with brilliant forks of lightning. But neither could help smiling at the absurdity of it all. That night, huddled beside a small makeshift fire, they dried off, and Zhara told him more about the fragments of memory that drifted through her mind, images of a forest planet, deeper in color than Cirrus 9, where a young version of her roamed among giant ferns. She wasn't sure if they were real recollections or just wishful dreams. Eli listened intently, occasionally sharing pieces of his own past, the loss of his parents, his aimless drift from station to station. Somehow, those memories felt distant out here, overshadowed by the immediate demands of forging a new life. Yet he realized that for the first time in years, he felt fulfilled. It was a strange sensation, but building something from nothing, especially side by side with a companion he cared about, gave him a sense of purpose. One evening, as they collected water from a nearby stream, Zhara paused, her tufted ears twitching. She sniffed the air and turned slowly, scanning the horizon. "Something new," she murmured. "I smell metal. Smoke." Eli peered in the same direction. Indeed, a faint column of smoke rose against the orange sunset. Adrenaline kicked in. Had someone else landed here? Possibly salvage hunters or outlaws. Or, worst of all, could the labs have dispatched a retrieval team? "Let's go quietly," he suggested, grabbing a small set of binoculars from his pack. They crept through tall grasses, approaching the smoky area. When they were close enough, Eli crouched and raised the binoculars, focusing on a broken vehicle, some sort of ground transport lying on its side. Next to it, two figures rummaged through crates, one cursing aloud in frustration. They didn't appear to be a heavily armed strike team. Rather, their battered clothes and lean frames marked them as drifters, perhaps akin to scavengers. But that didn't guarantee they were friendly. Cirrus 9's lawlessness could attract desperate souls. Zhara and Eli exchanged a glance. She pointed to a nearby cluster of rocks and bushes, indicating they might slip around for a better vantage. He nodded. They circled wide, keeping low, until they could see more clearly. The two individuals were a human man with ragged hair and a female reptilian alien with coppery scales. Both wore patched gear and carried basic sidearms. As they rummaged through the crashed transport, the reptilian hissed. "Nothing but junk. Rafe, you said this was a surefire haul." The human spat. "It was. Intel said these old roads had leftover supply caches. We just got unlucky." Laystra. Eli's tension ebbed somewhat. They seemed more frustrated scavengers than a threat. Perhaps forging an alliance could be beneficial strength in numbers, and maybe they had technology or knowledge about the planet. On the other hand, they could pose a danger if spooked. Zhara eyed him questioningly. He shrugged and crept closer, bracing himself. "Hello," he called softly. emerging from behind the rock with his hands raised. "We're not looking for trouble." Startled, the pair spun around, weapons drawn. Their eyes widened at the sight of Eli, and then, behind him, the imposing figure of Zhara. The reptilian hissed again, leveling her pistol warily. "Easy," Eli said, heart pounding. "We live nearby. We saw your crash. Thought maybe we could help." Rafe eyed them suspiciously. "Didn't know anyone lived out here. You from the old settlement." Eli decided to keep things vague. "We're just travelers, trying to get by in this abandoned place." Zhara stepped forward cautiously, her massive form dwarfing both scavengers. She nodded in greeting. Leistra's eyes flicked between them, taking in Zhara's horns and fur with a mix of awe and caution. "Well, we appreciate the neighborly concern," Leistra muttered, "but we're fine. Our transport's shot, though." Eli lowered his hands. "We might be able to help fix it." He paused, glancing at the battered vehicle. "Then again, it looks pretty bad." Rafe holstered his pistol slowly. "If you have a working comm or generator, that'd help. Ours got fried in the crash. If you can fix it, maybe we can scrounge enough for all of us." Zhara said nothing, merely observing the tension in the air, sensing that forging a truce could be valuable. Eli nodded. "We have some solar power back at our shelter. We might be able to rig a charge. Why don't you come with us?" Leistra exchanged a skeptical look with Rafe, then shrugged. "We're not in a position to refuse." "All right." Cautious relief washed over Eli. He gestured for them to follow, and they set off back toward the settlement. Zhara led the way, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to ensure the scavengers weren't up to anything suspicious. The uneasy alliance felt fragile, but perhaps it would bear fruit. When they reached the half-repaired outpost, Rafe whistled at the sight of the sturdy patchwork repairs. "You two have been busy," he remarked. "Not bad for a frontier fix." Eli introduced them to the rudimentary power rig they had constructed, a couple of salvaged solar panels, feeding an improvised battery array. "We can try charging your comm, or any gear you have," he offered. "We don't have much, but maybe it'll help." Leistra and Rafe set to work, hooking up their burnt-out comm device. Meanwhile, Zhara prepared a small fire to cook a bit of fresh meat from her earlier hunt. The newcomers watched with curiosity as she deftly skinned and roasted the animal, her large claws surprisingly nimble. Despite the tense start, a sense of shared hardship emerged. They all needed resources to survive on Cirrus 9. Over the meal, conversation flowed more freely. Rafe explained that they were roamers, drifting from system to system in search of salvage to sell. Leistra added that a rumor of abandoned mining equipment had drawn them here, but clearly they had found little of value. "Half the old facilities are stripped bare," she grumbled. "We were hoping to salvage something big." Eli, for his part, dodged direct questions about how he and Zhara had arrived. He simply said they had escaped troubles elsewhere and sought a quiet life. Neither Rafe nor Leistra pressed too hard, perhaps understanding that everyone had their secrets. By evening's end, the comm device was partially charged. The scavengers tested it, only to receive static. "Might be the local environment," Rafe muttered. "Or maybe we need a stronger booster." He cast a hopeful glance at Eli. "If you can help fix the transport's onboard systems, we might yet get out of this place with something to show for it. We'll split any salvage with you." Zhara raised a brow at Eli, silently questioning. He considered. They had come here for solitude, but resources were scarce. If they could salvage something from the crashed transport or the mines, they might improve their living conditions. "All right," he said slowly. "We'll help. But no double crosses. We're trusting you here." Leistra bared her fanged grin. "Understood. We might as well team up, better chance of survival." And so, a pact of convenience formed. Over the next days, they worked together, hauling salvage and attempting to repair the transport. Though Zhara distrusted the outsiders at first, she warmed to them gradually, especially when Leistra displayed a certain respect for her strength and skill. Rafe and Eli traded mechanical tips, though the crashed transport proved nearly irreparable. Even so, they managed to salvage enough metal and parts to reinforce the outpost further. Amid these labors, a fragile camaraderie developed. At night, around a shared fire, they told half-true stories of their pasts, trading jokes and practical survival tips. Zhara, listening intently, began to piece together more complex sentences, occasionally prompting good-natured laughter from the group when she mixed up certain terms. Despite all the hardship, those evenings were filled with a small but genuine warmth. Yet in the back of Eli's mind, a nagging worry remained. The labs would not give up easily. He suspected that Dr. Salwin's reach extended beyond Theta-12. But for now, on Cirrus 99's quiet plains, that threat seemed remote. In the comforting glow of the campfire, with Zhara at his side, it was easier to believe they might have found a true refuge. Weeks rolled by, turning into months. Slowly, the group's settlement transformed from a derelict ruin into a modest but functional homestead. Multiple structures were reinforced. One became a bunkhouse, another a workshop, and a third served as a communal cooking and gathering area. A small crop of hardy vegetables sprouted in a reclaimed patch of land near the stream, thanks to seeds Lystra had traded for long ago. Meanwhile, hunting and foraging supplemented their diets. Zhara proved adept at scouting the plains, her senses far keener than any human's. She often returned with fresh game or news of suspicious tracks. Eli taught her how to operate basic power tools they had managed to fix, and she took to them with determined enthusiasm. In turn, Lystra demonstrated the finer points of marksmanship, while Rafe improvised new contraptions from salvaged scrap. Amid these routines, an unspoken bond between Eli and Zhara deepened. In quiet moments, they would wander beyond the settlement, watching the twilight settle over the grassy horizon. She confided more about her fragmented memories, while he shared the subtle joys and sorrows that shaped his life before Theta-12. A gentle companionship blossomed, though neither labeled it in overt terms. They often gravitated to each other's side, drawn by a comforting sense of belonging. One afternoon, while rummaging through the remains of an old shed, Eli stumbled upon a battered old music player. Miraculously, after some tinkering, he got it to work. Though most audio files were corrupted, one track remained an old classical piece, sweeping and grand. He brought it back to the settlement and played it for the others. Zhara listened with wide eyes, her ears pricked, as the haunting melody drifted through the air. By its end, she was blinking away tears, and Lystra quietly admitted that she, too, felt stirred by the music. The frontier hush seemed to intensify in the wake of the final note, as though the planet itself paused to listen. But Cirrus 9, for all its quiet charm, harbored dangers. One night, a pack of lean, wolf-like predators with glowing eyes attempted to steal into the settlement. Zhara, keeping watch, roared a challenge. Brandishing a makeshift spear, the creatures snarled and skulked at the perimeter, but eventually retreated. It was a stark reminder that vigilance remained crucial. Yet the greater threat arrived from above. One afternoon, a small ship soared into the skies over the settlement, heading toward the old mines. At first, the group assumed it was more scavengers like Rafe and Lystra had been. But over the next day, more vessels landed. Some were sleek, bearing corporate insignia. Others were larger crafts bristling with sensors. Anxiety rippled through the homestead. They're searching the mines, Lystra guessed, watching from a vantage point atop a derelict building. But for what? Eli's blood ran cold. Could the labs have finally tracked them down? Or was there something else at play? He glanced at Zhara, whose horns shuddered with unease. That evening, the group gathered around the fire, discussing the arrival of these new parties. We should avoid them, Rafe said bluntly. If they're corporate, they won't hesitate to bully us off the planet if they want something. Lystra nodded. Could be they found out there's still valuable ore here, or discovered a new deposit. Big companies swoop in whenever profits beckon. Eli rubbed his temples. Zhara and I have to be especially careful. If they're connected to certain labs, I don't want them to see her. Zhara frowned. I fight them if come here, she growled. He placed a hand on her arm. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But maybe we should investigate. If we find out who they are and what they want, we can plan accordingly. Rafe agreed, albeit reluctantly. Sure, but we gotta be stealthy. We can't just wander into their camp. So, under the cover of darkness, Eli and Lystra slipped away from the homestead. Zhara insisted on coming, but they needed her strength guarding the settlement in case of surprise attack. She finally relented, though her intense worry shone in her eyes. Moving across the plains, Eli and Lystra followed the faint glow of lights from the direction of the mines. They hid behind rocks and tall grass, drawing nearer. Eventually, they reached a ridge overlooking a sprawling makeshift base camp, where at least a dozen ships were parked. Armed guards patrolled, wearing black uniforms with an emblem that looked disturbingly familiar to Eli. He nudged Lystra, pointing to a large lab structure hastily assembled near the mine's entrance. A sign displayed the stylized letters, Zhara Salwin Biogenetics. His heart skipped a beat. Dr. Salwin was here. The labs had come, presumably under a corporate name, scanning for valuable genetic resources or searching specifically for Zhara. He swallowed hard, adrenaline coursing through him. They must have traced us here, he whispered. We have to warn the others. Lystra's eyes narrowed. So it's not about ore, is it? They're after her. Before they could retreat, a watchtower swept through a floodlight over the ridge. Both froze. There! Came a shout. Shots rang out, bullets pinging off nearby rocks. Lystra grabbed Eli's arm, pulling him into a roll. They scrambled away, weaving between boulders as the searchlight followed. More gunfire rattled, but they managed to slip back into the darkness, guided by the terrain's folds. Panting, they fled, not stopping until they reached the outskirts of their homestead. Zhara rushed to meet them, worry etched across her features. You, safe? She asked urgently. Eli gulped for air. We're fine, but they're here. The labs, Dr. Salwin, must have found a lead that brought them to Cirrus 9. They'll come for you, Rafe cursed. What do we do? A tense silence settled. They all knew the labs possessed far greater resources. The illusions of peace on Cirrus 9 shattered with the arrival of corporate hunters. If they attacked, the small homestead stood little chance. Run, Lystra suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. We can't outrun them with no ship. Zhara's eyes flashed. I not run? She growled. I fight for home. Eli felt torn. They had built something precious here, a fragile refuge. To abandon it felt like surrendering all they'd worked for. Yet confronting the labs directly courted disaster. Finally, an idea emerged. The old mines, they might have labyrinthine tunnels we could use for an ambush, or at least to hide. If we lure them in, maybe we can fight on our terms. Lystra frowned. That's risky, but it beats sitting here waiting to get overwhelmed. You're sure about this? Zhara clutched a makeshift spear, eyes burning with determination. They hurt me many times. I not go back. Eli inhaled sharply, meeting the gaze of each ally in turn. All right, we'll make our stand. If we can sabotage their operation, maybe drive them away, we can keep Cirrus 9 free. So they gathered their scant resources tools that could serve as weapons. Leftover explosives from Rafe's salvaging, vantage gear. Though the odds seemed stacked, a fierce resolve gripped them. The next day, under the cover of storms that rolled in from the horizon, they set out toward the mines. The corporate presence must not be allowed to grow, or all would be lost. Even as fear churned in Eli's gut, he glanced at Zhara, who stood tall and proud, fur bristling in the rainy wind. Somehow, her courage lent him strength. Together, they would face whatever came next. A dull roar of thunder accompanied them as they arrived at the mine's outer perimeter. Rain lashed the landscape, churning the ground into slippery mud. Overhead, dark clouds rolled with silent fury. Perfect conditions for stealth, Eli thought grimly. They split into two teams. Rafe and Lystra circled to the far side of the corporate base, aiming to sabotage ships or disrupt communications. Meanwhile, Eli and Zhara approached the main path leading down into the mines. They hoped to lure a portion of the guards underground, where cramped tunnels would negate numerical superiority. The plan felt tenuous, but with no better options, they pressed on, hiding behind a cluster of boulders. Eli peered at the bright floodlights, illuminating the entrance. Guards in black uniforms loitered around, clutching rifles. One pylon held a scanning device that likely detected movement or heat signatures. He turned to Zhara, whispering, "When I create a diversion, get inside quickly." She nodded, gripping her spear. Drops of rain trickled down her fur, and her horns glistened. With a shared look, they launched into motion. Eli crawled along the ground until he was within throwing distance of a small crate. Rafe had rigged with an improvised explosive. With shaking hands, he armed the device and flung it toward the pylon. It skittered across the muddy ground, drawing confused shouts. A moment later, a thunderous boom split the air, sending sparks and debris flying. Chaos erupted. The scanning pylon toppled, its sensor panels shattered. Guards dove for cover, returning wild gunfire. In the confusion, Zhara sprang forward, covering ground with powerful strides. She rammed into two guards, knocking them to the muddy earth before they could fire. Eli dashed after her, weaving to avoid stray bullets. They gained the mine entrance, darting into the yawning tunnel. Overhead lights flickered, the corridor leading into darkness. Behind them, corporate soldiers shouted, launching flares down the passage. Zhara bared her teeth, letting out a resonant roar that echoed off the stone walls. The sound reverberated, momentarily cowing those behind. "Down!" Eli hissed, pulling her behind a support beam as a volley of shots whizzed past. Sparks danced against the stone, illuminating the corridor in brief flashes. He peeked around, seeing at least 4 guards advancing in a tight formation. He signaled to Zhara. She nodded, her large foot scuffing against the dirt floor. As the guards closed in, she lunged, tossing one aside like a rag doll. Another took aim, but Eli slammed a metal rod into the guard's weapon, sending the shot wild. Zhara delivered a swift strike, her spear cracking the guard's armor. They pressed deeper into the tunnel, forcing the soldiers to follow. Soon the corridor branched, leading into a warren of old mining shafts. Eli had studied the outpost records. He knew the labyrinth extended for miles in these cramped conditions. Zhara's sheer strength and agility gave them an edge. The guards might outnumber them, but they couldn't form ranks or bring heavy equipment inside easily. They weaved left, then right, descending deeper into dimly lit passages. Water dripped from overhead, forming shallow pools on the ground. Occasionally, they ambushed a smaller patrol, disarming or incapacitating them. Zhara's presence was formidable. Her roar alone seemed to strike fear in the hearts of the corporate goons. Adrenaline thrummed through Eli's veins, overshadowing fear with fierce determination. At one junction, they encountered a more organized squad, armed with heavier weaponry. Pinning themselves behind a rock outcropping, they exchanged gunfire. Zhara, lacking a firearm, relied on her spear, but the narrower space limited her approach. Eli fired a salvaged pistol taken from a fallen guard, though his aim was shaky. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off stone. Suddenly, a deafening rumble shook the tunnel. Pieces of the ceiling collapsed, sending rocks crashing down. Eli realized with horror that the structural integrity of the mine was compromised. If they weren't careful, the entire shaft could come down on them. "Move! Move!" he shouted, pulling Zhara away from the danger zone. The guards likewise scattered, some disappearing down side corridors. Dust choked the air, reducing visibility to near zero. Deafened by the roar of falling debris, Eli clutched Zhara's arm, urging her forward. They stumbled through the gloom until they found a half-intact chamber, its walls lined with rusted mining equipment. He collapsed against a battered console, coughing. Zhara panted beside him, eyes scanning the swirling dust. At least for the moment, they were safe from the collapsing corridor, but the path behind them was blocked with rubble, and the presence of guards ahead was uncertain. With trembling hands, Eli checked the console. To his surprise, It still had faint power. A few flickering lights on the panel indicated some kind of automated system. Perhaps the mines retained an emergency generator, or the corporate team had reactivated them. As he tried to parse the archaic readouts, Zhara kept watch, spear poised. "Here," Eli whispered, pointing to a battered map of the tunnels displayed on a cracked screen. "We might be near an exit that leads to the lower canyon. If we can slip out that way, circle around, we could regroup with Rafe and Laistra." Zhara nodded, stepping closer to the console. "We go," she rumbled. "Not let them trap us." Cautiously, they slipped from the chamber into a side passage. Their footsteps echoed on stone. The dust gradually settled, revealing twisted support beams overhead. The air smelled of damp earth and metal. Somewhere in the distance, corporate guards barked orders, but the acoustics made it hard to pinpoint location. Twice they heard scuttling and froze, only to see a large rodent-like creature skitter away. As they progressed, the tunnel sloped downward. A faint draft suggested an opening ahead. With each step, Eli's heart thudded in hopes they might escape. But near the final bend, figures emerged, two black armored guards. They must have anticipated someone trying to exit this way. Zhara and Eli ducked behind a rocky column. Hearing the guard's footsteps approach, Zhara pressed her palm to her chest, then jabbed a thumb at herself. She mouthed, "I distract. You slip by." Eli shook his head vehemently, not wanting to abandon her, but she insisted, her eyes burning with urgency. Finally, he realized that with her size and strength, she stood a better chance of subduing them, allowing him to slip out and call for help. Reluctantly, he nodded, in one smooth motion. Zhara lunged out from cover, letting loose a feral snarl. The guards spun around, rifles raised. Gunfire rattled. She expertly dodged to the side, deflecting a shot with the metal shaft of her spear. Stone fragments flew. Eli used the distraction, darting along the perimeter of the passage until he was behind the guards. One turned at the last second, but too late Eli kicked the guard's knee, causing him to stumble. Zhara followed with a swift blow, sending him crashing to the floor. The other guard swung his rifle butt, catching Zhara across the ribs. She grunted in pain, but wrenched the weapon from his grip and slammed him into the wall with a thunderous crack. Breathing heavily, she slumped slightly. Eli rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" he whispered, noticing blood matting the fur at her side. She shook her head, though her eyes glistened with pain. "IFINE," she managed. "Go." Eli supported her as they moved forward, stepping over the unconscious guards. The tunnel opened into a rocky canyon, where the storm had subsided into a persistent drizzle. Gray light filtered through the clouds above. They emerged onto a narrow ledge, which wound along the canyon wall. Far below, a frothing river churned. Far above, the jagged rim glowed with the fleeting rays of a setting sun. They paused, scanning for any sign of pursuit. None came. For now, they were free of the mines, but the corporate force remained entrenched at the entrance. They could see the base's floodlights in the distance, cutting through the gloom. Zhara steadied herself against the canyon wall, breathing raggedly. "We go back to others." Eli nodded, brow furrowed with concern. "Yes, but first we need to make sure you're all right." He gently lifted the makeshift bandage from her side. The wound was a deep graze, likely from a bullet that had skimmed her. Blood trickled, but not profusely. He tore strips from his shirt, binding the area to stem bleeding. She winced, but nodded her gratitude. Darkness approached rapidly, the last vestiges of daylight swallowed by ominous clouds. They carefully made their way along the canyon path, occasionally slipping on wet rock. Each step took them farther from the mines, hopefully beyond the immediate reach of the lab's soldiers. Every so often, thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing through the chasms like a chorus of warning drums. When at last they reached the open plains, night had fallen fully. Using the stars as a guide, those not masked by clouds, they angled toward their homestead. Their pace was slow, mindful of Zhara's injury. Eli's pulse hammered with both relief and looming dread. They had survived the first skirmish, but the labs were not defeated. This was only a reprieve. He tightened his arm around Zhara, offering silent support. She leaned on him, her large form trembling slightly from pain and exhaustion. Still, she walked on with resolute pride, refusing to collapse. It struck him how fiercely determined she was to remain free, to protect their fragile home. In that moment, admiration and affection swelled in Eli's chest, forging an unspoken bond that transcended words. They would heal, regroup, and face whatever came next together. Night cloaked the homestead when they finally stumbled back. A small beacon set up by Rafe guided them in, and relief washed over them at the sight of familiar silhouettes moving under the faint glow of salvaged lamps. Leistra hurried forward, her copper scales gleaming. To support Zhara, Rafe let out a low whistle, seeing the bandage. Eli recounted the harrowing events at the mines, the ambush, the collapsing tunnels, the corporate presence. Rafe explained that he and Leistra had managed to sabotage some of the ships enough to delay immediate pursuit, but a large portion of the corporate forces remained operational. Their infiltration had yielded a crucial piece of intel. Dr. Salwin was personally overseeing a reclamation project, presumably searching for Zhara or something akin to her genetic material. The labs had come prepared for a long campaign, seated around a makeshift table. They weighed options. Zhara rested, leaning against Eli, her wound freshly cleaned and dressed. She was stoic in her silence, though her eyes burned with an intense desire for resolution. It's only a matter of time before they mount a full assault on this place, Leistra said grimly. We can't hold them off indefinitely. They're better armed, Rafe nodded. We can't outrun them without a ship, and if they think we're harboring their escaped property, they'll burn this settlement to the ground. Eli clenched his fists, anger coursing through him. Zhara's not property, he said, through gritted teeth. A haunted look crossed Leistra's face. I know, but they won't see it that way. Zhara slowly rose, ignoring the twinge of pain. I face them, she rumbled. If I go, maybe, they leave you alone. No, Eli snapped, standing abruptly. I won't let you hand yourself over. They'll do worse things. We have to find a better way. Silence settled. Rain pelted the roof overhead. At last, Rafe sighed. We might not beat them in a frontal fight, but what if we sabotage their entire operation? They rely on supplies, communication, and a stable landing zone at the mines. If we strike at those, we might force them to abandon the mission too costly to continue. Leistra's brow ridges arched, a scorched earth approach. Eli nodded slowly, mind churning. Destroy their base infrastructure, cripple their resources. They'll have to withdraw. Corporate logic. If the expense outweighs the gain, they'll cut losses. Zhara rumbled her agreement. No mercy for them. They give me no mercy. And so a daring plan formed. Over the next 2 nights, they prepared quietly, forging crude explosives from leftover mining charges, rigging traps from sharpened scrap, and mapping infiltration routes. Zhara insisted on joining despite her injury. Eli patched her up as best he could. She carried the weight of vengeance, her usually gentle demeanor hardened by the knowledge that captivity awaited if they failed. When the time came, they moved under the cover of darkness once more. This time, all 4 crept along the approach to the corporate base. The lab's perimeter had expanded, floodlights shining across the dusty terrain. Yet with cunning use of the landscape and stealth, they evaded the patrol patterns. Rafe and Leistra split off to plant charges on the grounded ships, aiming to disable them entirely. Meanwhile, Eli and Zhara slipped toward the command center, a large prefab structure that likely housed communications and power generators. Lightning flickered across the sky, revealing the silhouette of tall watchtowers. A guard on one tower, scanning with night vision goggles, nearly spotted them. But Zhara lunged behind a shipping container, dragging Eli along. He felt her muscles tense like coiled steel, her breath shallow with anticipation. It was a stark reminder of her dual nature, gentle yet powerful, protective yet lethal. They pressed on, eventually reaching the command center's rear entrance. 2 guards stood watch, but the swirling wind and sporadic thunder aided the infiltration. Zhara crouched low, waiting for the right moment. Then, with fluid grace, she darted forward, dispatching both guards before they could raise an alarm. Eli hurried to pry open the sealed door, hacking the rudimentary access panel with a salvaged device. Inside, the hum of machinery filled the air. Data terminals lined the walls, while a large generator thrummed in the corner. Another door likely led to Dr. Salwin's main lab area. Eli's heart pounded. Destroying the command center would blind the operation, but they also needed to confirm whether Dr. Salwin or key data was inside. If the lab's records on Zhara survived, the pursuit might continue indefinitely. He signaled Zhara to remain watchful as he approached the generator. Pulling out a set of tools, he began rigging an explosive. Sparks flew as he cut through cables, sweat beading on his brow. Time was critical, any second. An alarm could sound. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Zhara tensed, spear ready. A figure emerged tall, clad in a white coat, face partially hidden behind a mask. Dr. Salwin. Eli's blood ran cold. Salwin's gaze swept over them, hardly blinking at Zhara's towering presence. "Specimen Z," Salwin said calmly, voice eerily composed. "You've caused quite a disruption. Return now, and the rest can be spared. I only need you." The doctor's voice carried an unsettling confidence, as if certain of ultimate victory. Zhara snarled, stepping forward. "No, Cage," she growled, muscles rippling with barely constrained fury. Salwin inclined their head, unruffled. "I see. Then we will proceed with more force. Unfortunate, but you leave us no choice." Eli lifted his pistol, hands shaking with rage. "You're not taking her back, ever." A faint smirk crossed Salwin's lips. "How quaint. You're in over your head, child." The doctor pressed a small device in their palm, triggering an alarm. Sirens wailed, red lights flashing. "There! Reinforcements are on the way," Zhara roared, charging forward, but Salwin retreated swiftly, slipping through a side door that sealed behind them with a hiss. Eli cursed under his breath, hearing shouts and hurried boots approach from outside. "We have to hurry," he said, returning to the bomb. With trembling fingers, he set the last connection. 30 seconds. "That's all we've got," Zhara nodded, eyes blazing. "Go." They sprinted down the corridor, ignoring the alarms and flashing lights. Guards converged from multiple directions. One opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the metal walls. Zhara shielded Eli, her thick fur absorbing a glancing shot. He cried out in alarm, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to slow. At last, they burst out into the stormy night. The rain hammered down, forging slick mud underfoot. Shouts rose behind them. They dashed across open ground, hearts pounding. 20 seconds. 15. 10. A colossal explosion ripped through the command center, sending a fireball into the sky. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, mud spraying in all directions. Smoke billowed, debris raining down. In the distance, other blasts signaled Rafe and Leistra's success with the ships. The base erupted into chaos, lit by flames and panic. Coughing, Eli helped Zhara to her feet. She winced from the bruises and the fresh bullet graze on her arm. He steadied her, scanning the area. Corporate forces scrambled like ants, trying to quench fires, rescue equipment, or rally disoriented squads. The lab's neat perimeter had become a war zone. For the moment, no one targeted them. They retreated into the darkness, guided by raw survival instinct. Treading through the churned mud, they circled wide, eventually reuniting with Rafe and Leistra near a rocky outcrop. The pair looked exhausted but triumphant. "We blew half their ships," Rafe panted. "They won't be leaving easily, or chasing us anywhere fast." A grin tugged at Leistra's scaled lips. "Nice fireworks with that command center." Eli nodded, adrenaline still racing. "Doctor," Salwin triggered the alarm, "but hopefully, the operation is crippled enough to force them out." Zhara stared at the distant flames, her breathing unsteady. "We did it." "Maybe," Eli replied, voice hushed. They're hurt badly, but the labs might try again. We need to keep watch." With that, the four of them slipped away, the storm cloaking their retreat. Despite the aches and wounds, a fierce satisfaction accompanied them. They had struck a decisive blow, one that might buy them precious time or even drive the labs to abandon the mission altogether. Yet as Eli walked beside Zhara, helping her limp through the soggy plains, he couldn't shake Dr. Salwin's cold words. The labs were relentless. If not here, they might ambush them again. But for the moment, they held on to a fragile victory, hoping it would be enough to protect their home and the precious freedom Zhara had fought so hard to claim. In the days following the attack, an uneasy calm settled over Cirrus 9. Scouts sent to observe the corporate base reported heavy damage. A large portion of the lab's infrastructure lay in ruins, with salvageable gear likely minimal. Charred wreckage dotted the site, and the smoke lingered. Dr. Salwin's whereabouts were uncertain. Some said they had escaped on the one remaining shuttle. Others claimed they died in the blast. Regardless, the corporate presence had withered, leaving only a few scattered patrols or automated drones. It seemed the labs no longer had the means or will to mount a full assault. Relief washed through the homestead, yet everyone remained on guard, anticipating a possible counterstrike. Zhara's injuries slowly healed under Leistra's makeshift medical care. Each day, she grew stronger, resuming her place as chief scout and guardian. Weeks passed with no further incursions. It appeared that the labs had truly pulled out, at least for now. Word spread, via the newly repaired comm device, that Cirrus 9 was once again a sleepy backwater, uninteresting to major factions. Rafe and Leistra toyed with the idea of leaving for another salvage run, but the bond of camaraderie forged in battle held them a little longer. They had grown fond of this patch of wilderness and the strange little family they had formed. As for Eli and Zhara, their relationship deepened into something unmistakably warm and close. They spent quiet evenings together, sometimes walking along the stream under the starlight, other times simply leaning on each other in comfortable silence. She practiced her English tirelessly, eager to express her thoughts more fluently. He marveled at how quickly she learned, and soon they could share more intricate conversations, albeit with occasional stumbles. One night, the air crisp and the stars bright, they climbed a small hill overlooking the plains. A gentle breeze stirred the grasses, and faint moonlight silvered the edges of Zhara's horns. They settled side by side, no words necessary for a time. At length, Eli ventured softly, "I never expected this kind of life, but I'm glad for it. For you." Zhara turned to him, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Me too," she whispered. At first, only fear. Then you brought hope. Her large furred hand found his, her claws carefully retracted. "I cherish that." Emotion caught in his throat. Their journey had been fraught with danger, but here, in the hush of Cirrus 9's night, he realized he had found more than a safe haven. He had found genuine companionship, perhaps even love, in a place he least expected. "You deserve peace," he murmured. "No more labs. No more running. I want to stay with you, build a real home." She tilted her head, a soft rumble in her chest. "Yes." Together, gently. He leaned closer, feeling the warmth of her breath, seeing the subtle quiver of her ears. Hesitantly, he pressed his forehead against hers, mindful of her horns. A tender hush enveloped them, as though the entire planet paused to witness this moment. Though words were few, the shared closeness spoke volumes. Eventually, they stood, hand in hand, and made their way back to the homestead. In the near distance, the lights of their settlement glimmered with quiet promise. Perhaps the future held uncertainties, further threats from corporate labs, the rigors of frontier survival, but for now, they embraced the hope that blossomed amidst adversity. Over the following months, life on Cirrus 9 settled into a steady rhythm. Rafe and Leistra officially decided to remain, assisting with expansions to the settlement. Together, The group erected additional structures, cultivated more farmland, and even restored a small greenhouse discovered among the old mining warehouses. Their settlement gradually grew into a tiny community, a far cry from the lonely outpost it once was. Word of mouth spread by scattered scavengers who passed through indicated that the labs had abandoned their projects on Cirrus 9 entirely. A few times, distant ships were spotted in the sky, but none landed near the settlement. Some travelers visited to trade or share news, often amazed to find a horned, furred alien overseeing the security of a backwater homestead. Zhara's imposing presence, tempered by her gentle heart, often left a lasting impression. Eli took on the role of engineer in residence, improving solar power arrays, rigging a simple irrigation system, and teaching others how to maintain the patchwork tech. Zhara became both scout and protector, as well as a symbol of resilience for the entire group. Children descendants of a family that moved in seeking refuge from corporate exploitation often stared in awe at her horns and tail, giggling when she'd rumble a greeting. On one sweltering afternoon, as Eli hammered a support beam into place, Zhara approached with a wide grin. "Eli," she called, "come see." She led him to a clearing outside the settlement, where tall grasses swayed. Nestled in that clearing was something he hadn't noticed before: a small ring of standing stones, weathered by time. Intrigued, they examined the ancient carvings etched into the rock. Faded symbols suggested that long ago, a different civilization might have inhabited Cirrus 9, leaving only scattered remnants. Though the meaning of the carvings remained obscure, the discovery hinted at deeper mysteries hidden within the planet's forgotten corners. As they stood amid the stones, a gentle breeze tousling their hair and fur, Zhara asked quietly, "Think, my people. Maybe different planet," he considered. "Possibly. The galaxy is vast. You might have kin out there. But if we never find them, this place can be your home. Our home." She nodded, a faint sadness in her eyes, balanced by acceptance. "I like it here," she admitted. "People, friends. No cages." He reached out, taking her large hand in his. "Me too." With that, they lingered a bit longer, admiring the silent stones, letting the warm sun and open sky fill them with a quiet peace. That evening, the community gathered for a humble feast. Rafe had hunted a large game creature, and Laistra concocted a spicy stew with local herbs. Children played tag among the half-rebuilt structures, and a fiddler from a distant settlement offered a lilting tune. As dusk fell, the group lit torches around the communal area, the flickering glow reflecting in Zhara's eyes. Eli watched her from across the gathering, struck by how effortlessly she had become part of their small society. People respected her, not in fear, but in gratitude for her watchful courage and kind spirit. He felt a pang of pride and affection so strong it almost ached, sensing his gaze. Zhara crossed the space between them. She stooped to meet his eyes, her voice low in the background murmur of conversation. "Hungry?" she asked, smiling. He chuckled. "A bit. Save me some stew." She handed him a bowl, brimming with the savory aroma of spices. "Always," she replied, stepping closer, gently. She bumped her forehead to his, a gesture that had become their quiet sign of affection. The warmth in that moment chased away lingering worries about the past. They had found a fragile paradise on Cirrus 9, a place where they could coexist with friends, forging a life on their own terms. As night deepened, the stars blanketed the sky in a breathtaking tapestry. The settlement lights glowed softly, and the festival-like atmosphere eventually gave way to quieter conversations. Eli and Zhara strolled beyond the edge of the light, hand in hand, hearts buoyed by the knowledge that, despite all challenges, they had forged a future together, one built on trust, warmth, and the shared determination never to let fear rule them again. Months turned into a year, and the settlement thrived beyond anyone's initial expectations. Buildings once ravaged by time stood repaired and repurposed. Fields yielded modest harvests, and a genuine community spirit took root. Travelers passing by were welcomed, provided they respected the settlement's peaceful ethos. Some stayed permanently, adding their skills to the collective, while others ventured on, carrying tales of a horned guardian and her human partner who had tamed a forgotten world. Zhara's language skills blossomed. Though her speech remained occasionally halting, she held conversations with ease. She also picked up rudimentary reading, poring over any old digital files or musty tomes that the settlement acquired. Her curiosity about everything history.science cultures seemed boundless. Eli patiently guided her, thrilled to see the spark of intellectual hunger ignite in her eyes. Their personal bond only strengthened. In private moments, they spoke of dreams of the day they might expand the settlement into a thriving haven, or perhaps find a way to explore the galaxy together without fear. Yet neither felt the need to leave Sirius 9 anytime soon. The planet, despite its ruggedness, had become a sanctuary. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived, Jask Tarn in his patched-up ship. He landed near the outskirts, stepping onto the dusty ground with a wide grin. "Heard rumors there was a real community sprouting here," he said, hugging Eli in greeting. "Didn't realize you two were behind it." Not bad at all." Zhara towered over the pilot, greeting him with polite interest. Jask merely whistled, shaking his head. "You look a lot healthier than the last time I saw you in that cramped cargo hold." She rumbled a laugh. "Much has changed. We owe you thanks for your help," Jask shrugged, waving it off. "Couldn't have done it without your credits. Speaking of which, I'm here partly on business. Thought you might have some resources to trade. A pilot like me can supply goods from across the sector if you can offer something valuable in return. Maybe you have surplus produce or local artifacts. I hear salvage from the old mines has become popular among collectors." Indeed, the settlement had begun gathering surplus items, from handcrafted textiles to refurbished electronics. Over the next few days, the community struck a mutually beneficial deal with Jask. He promised to return periodically, bringing rare supplies or medical items. In exchange, he took back a hold full of local crafts, small mineral samples, and even a few of the mysterious stone carvings from around the planet. Rafe and Laestra, veterans of salvage, helped negotiate fair prices. On the day of Jask's departure, he pulled Eli aside. "Listen," he said in a low voice. "Rumors swirl about that doc, Salwin. Some say the labs want revenge for what happened on Sirius 9. But the corporate bigwigs have moved on, focusing on more profitable ventures. If you're still worried, keep your guard up. But from what I hear, you're not their priority." Eli nodded, relief and caution mingling. "Thanks for the tip. We'll stay vigilant." With a last wave, Jask took off, leaving behind the faint roar of engines echoing across the plains. The settlement watched him go, grateful to have a small link to the wider galaxy that felt neither invasive nor threatening. That evening, Zhara and Eli stood on the same hill where they'd once shared whispered confessions of hope. The sunset cast long shadows across the rolling grassland, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Zhara leaned her tall frame against him, her fur soft against his cheek. "We stand strong," she said quietly, gazing out at the settlement below. "No more fear." He slipped an arm around her waist, recalling the harrowing journey that had led them here, a battered closet on Theta-12, frantic escapes, corporate hunts, the forging of alliances with Rafe and Laestra, the final stand at the mines. It all felt distant, like a dark dream. Yet the memory underscored how precious their present happiness was. "Yeah," he said, voice gentle. "No more fear, just us, and everyone here." Her golden eyes flicked to him. "I love you," she said softly, still occasionally stumbling over certain words, but earnest in her tone. A surge of warmth lit his chest. They had danced around these feelings for some time, letting actions speak louder than words. But hearing it still made his heart pound. He smiled, pressing closer to her side. "I love you too, Zhara." They remained there in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Stars began to shimmer overhead, heralding the onset of night. A quiet contentment filled them. built upon shared adversity and the triumph of forging a life far from the shadows that once bound them. A new chapter of freedom and unity stretched before them, waiting to be written in the gentle starlight of Sirius 9. Years later, under a broad dome of stars, Eli ran a hand across the weathered wood of the settlement's main gate. Beyond, fields of golden crops swayed gently, and the hum of low power lights illuminated tidy walkways. Children, human, reptilian, and other species laughed as they chased each other around the communal courtyard. A blacksmith's hammer rang in the distance. The settlement had grown into a thriving little colony, welcoming newcomers seeking a peaceful refuge from the galaxy's turmoil. Zhara, now fully recovered from her old wounds, had become something of a local legend, a guardian whose roaring charge kept threats at bay, but who also coaxed laughter from wide-eyed youngsters as she hoisted them onto her broad shoulders. On this evening, she strolled through the settlement with a gentle smile, greeting passers-by who waved enthusiastically. She wore practical clothing crafted from sturdy fabrics, tailored to accommodate her tall, furred frame. A pair of ornamental bands looped around her horns, tokens of appreciation from the blacksmith's family. Reaching Eli's side, she leaned down, nuzzling him gently. He turned, eyes bright with affection. "Busy day?" he asked, smiling up at her. She nodded. "Helped fix fence, then taught some archery lessons. They learn quick," he chuckled. "Your life is never dull." They walked arm in arm through the settlement, eventually stopping at the workshop. Inside, a half-finished starship engine module rested, part of a project Rafe and Lystra had been tinkering with, hoping to someday construct a small craft that could connect Sirius 9 to distant trade routes more reliably. The old mechanical passion never left them. The settlement might remain remote, but no one here was content to remain stagnant. Eli ran a hand over the sleek metal casing. "Another few months, and they might get this thing flight-ready," he mused. Zhara tilted her head. "Then we can visit other worlds. See more." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe, if we want, but we'll always come back here. This is home." She rumbled approval. Home. As twilight deepened, they headed to the communal fire pit, where a modest feast was underway. Families chatted. Newly arrived travelers swapped tales, and the local fiddler struck up a lively tune. Lystra served steaming bowls of stew, while Rafe regaled a cluster of wide-eyed kids with likely exaggerated stories of past salvage runs. Zhara and Eli found seats on a wooden bench, side by side, legs stretched out toward the warm glow of the fire. The conversation, the music, the crackling flames all merged into a tapestry of life. For a moment, Eli's mind drifted back to the stale corridors of Theta-12, the day he first heard a terrifying growl from his closet, never dreaming it was the start of a journey toward profound companionship and purpose. Now, with Zhara's hand enveloping his, he felt a contentment he once thought impossible. The seeds of that fateful day had blossomed into a vibrant tomorrow, woven from perseverance, trust, and love. And here, amid the hush of night and the flicker of firelight, they basked in a happy ending that still carried the promise of new beginnings on every horizon.